Angelina Jolie is not just a beauty that made the world bow. She is a collection of wounds hidden behind camera flashes. Millions believe they understand her, yet no one has ever touched her deepest layer. After 8 years of divorce, for the first time, Angelina Jolie allows silence to speak. About Brad Pitt, and about a love once believed to be her final refuge. Before Angelina Jolie became a global icon, before her face turned into a symbol printed on magazine covers and movie posters, she was already carrying a quiet fracture inside. Fame did not create her loneliness. It only gave it a stage. From an early age, Angelina moved through the world with a strange awareness that she did not fully belong anywhere. Too intense for ordinary spaces. Too sensitive for a world that demanded composure. She learned early how to observe herself from the outside, as if her own life were a film she was both acting in and watching at the same time. This distance became her shield. And also her wound. It was during this unsettled period that she stepped onto the set of Hackers. The film itself was strange, chaotic, ahead of its time, much like Angelina herself. She walked into that world not as a star, but as a young woman still trying to understand what kind of person she was allowed to be. There, she met Johnny Lee Miller. He was calm where she was volatile. Quiet where she was burning. He listened more than he spoke. And for Angelina, that alone felt revolutionary. With him, she did not need to perform intensity. She could simply exist. Their love unfolded softly, away from spectacle. After long shooting days, they would climb onto rooftops, lie on their backs, smoke cigarettes, and talk about the things neither of them dared to say out loud during daylight. Fear. Childhood scars. The terror of growing up and becoming someone unrecognizable to oneself. With him, love felt safe. And yet, it was also reckless. Their marriage reflected that contradiction perfectly. No grand ceremony. No audience. Just a white shirt, black pants, and an act so raw it frightened even those closest to her. She wrote his name on her body with her own blood. Not as shock. But as proof. Proof that she could feel something real in a world that already felt artificial. This was not romance in the traditional sense. It was attachment at the edge of survival. Loving as a way to anchor herself to existence. To say, I am here. I am alive. I matter to someone. For a time, it worked. They lived inside a fever of youth, where every day felt urgent, irreplaceable, and fragile. Outsiders saw intensity and passion. What they did not see was how much that intensity was fueled by fear, fear of abandonment, fear of emptiness, fear of silence. But youth does not protect love from distance. Careers accelerated. Flights multiplied. Days turned into missed calls and unfinished sentences. While Angelina immersed herself in demanding roles and emotional extremes, he returned to his own world across the ocean. Time zones replaced intimacy. Silence slowly replaced words. When they separated, there were no explosions. No public accusations. Just two young people standing in front of each other, quietly admitting that they had loved before they knew how to stay. The light of youth is brilliant. But it does not defeat time. And it cannot survive distance. That ending did not harden Angelina. It carved something deeper. It taught her that love could be beautiful and still disappear. That attachment could feel like safety, and still fail to save her. And without realizing it, she carried that lesson forward. Straight into the next fire. If her first love was a quiet shelter, the next one was a storm she walked into willingly. Angelina Jolie had always been drawn to edges, to people who carried danger in their voices and contradiction in their eyes. After the soft collapse of youthful love, something inside her shifted. Safety no longer felt enough. She wanted intensity. She wanted truth without filters. She wanted to feel alive, even if it meant burning. That was when she met Billy Bob Thornton. He was older. Weathered. Unpolished. A man shaped by chaos, excess, and survival. Where others tried to manage Angelina's intensity, Billy Bob seemed to welcome it. He did not ask her to soften. He did not try to understand her storms. He stepped directly into them. Their connection was immediate and unapologetic. There was no slow unfolding, no careful restraint. It felt like recognition between two people who had lived too fast and felt too much. The world watched, stunned, as they plunged into a relationship that rejected every rule Hollywood quietly obeyed. Their marriage arrived suddenly, almost defiantly. No build-up. No performance. Just a decision made in the heat of certainty. It was not a promise of stability. It was a declaration of freedom. They wore vials of each other's blood around their necks, small glass symbols of devotion that terrified some and fascinated others. They tattooed each other's names onto their skin, as if love needed to be permanent in ink to survive. To outsiders, it looked like spectacle. To them, it was sincerity taken to its extreme. This was not love with boundaries. It was love without breaks. For a time, they existed inside that fire. Writing music together. Appearing in public as if nothing could touch them. Laughing at judgment. Thriving on shock. They built a world where intensity was proof of authenticity, where excess meant honesty. But passion, when left unchecked, eventually demands a cost. The fracture began quietly, almost invisibly, the moment Angelina's focus shifted. When she adopted Maddox, something ancient and irreversible awakened inside her. Motherhood did not arrive as an accessory to her life. It rewired her entirely. For the first time, love was no longer just about connection. It was about responsibility. Billy Bob struggled with that shift. He had loved the woman who lived for impulse and freedom, not the one who suddenly lived for someone else. Parenthood introduced gravity into a relationship built on weightlessness. What had once felt thrilling now felt restrictive. What had once been romantic now felt incompatible. The distance between them did not explode. It expanded. They did not fight loudly. They did not accuse. They simply grew quiet. And in that quiet, it became clear that they were no longer moving in the same direction. When the marriage ended, it did so without spectacle. No public war. No dramatic statements. Just silence. The kind that follows when two people understand that love, however real it once was, cannot survive the lives they are becoming. Psychologically, this chapter mattered more than it appeared. Angelina learned that passion alone cannot sustain intimacy. That freedom without shared purpose eventually fractures. And most importantly, she learned that motherhood would always outrank desire. The fire had been real. But fire cannot raise a child. And so she walked away, carrying with her another lesson, one that would echo powerfully when she encountered the men who would change everything that came next. Some loves arrive gently. Others arrive like fate, uninvited and irreversible. When Angelina Jolie met Brad Pitt, it did not feel like the beginning of an affair. It felt like recognition. A quiet, unsettling sense that something had already been written long before either of them was ready to read it. At that time, Brad Pitt belonged to another life. Another story. Another marriage. He was still the husband of Jennifer Aniston, a relationship the public had crowned as ideal, stable, untouchable. On paper, nothing about this moment should have happened. And yet, on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, something shifted. There were explosions, choreography, scripted tension. But beneath the noise, an invisible current began to move. It was not flirtation. Not seduction. It was something slower, deeper, and far more dangerous. A pull without language. A gravity that did not ask for permission. Angelina later described it not as desire, but as inevitability. As if, without noticing, their emotional defenses had quietly lowered. Conversations stretched longer than necessary. Silences became comfortable. Laughter carried weight. What started as professionalism began to blur into something that felt disturbingly personal. They tried to ignore it. They tried to remain inside their roles. But some connections do not need to be acknowledged to exist. For Angelina, this was unfamiliar territory. Her past loves had been intense, impulsive, loud. This was different. This felt mature. Measured. As if two people who had already been broken in specific ways suddenly recognized the shape of each other's fractures. For Brad, it was equally destabilizing. He had built a life defined by stability, public approval, and careful distance from chaos. And yet, with Angelina, he felt awake in a way that unsettled him. Not reckless. Awake. When his marriage ended in the year 2005, the world erupted. The media did not ask questions. It declared verdicts. Headlines exploded. Cameras hunted relentlessly. Two names merged into one, brangelina. A word that sounded almost playful, yet carried the weight of scandal, desire, and fascination. They became the most watched couple on the planet overnight. But inside that storm, something quieter was forming. This was not a romance fueled by secrecy or thrill alone. It was built on shared depth. Shared values. A shared hunger to live beyond the shallow definitions Hollywood often imposed. Angelina was drawn to Brad's gentleness beneath strength. Brad was drawn to her fearlessness beneath vulnerability. Together, they created an image of power that went beyond beauty. They spoke about humanitarian work. About responsibility. About building a family that reflected the world, not just their own reflections. Psychologically, this love marked a turning point. For Angelina, Brad was not an escape. He was a mirror. Someone who could stand beside her without being consumed by her intensity. Someone who did not fear her darkness, yet did not romanticize it either. With him, she felt both protected and challenged. For Brad, Angelina represented movement. Expansion. A confrontation with parts of himself he had kept carefully controlled. She did not offer him peace. She offered him meaning. This was love with weight. Love with consequences. It healed old wounds even as it opened new ones. It offered belonging while demanding accountability. It gave them purpose while exposing them to unprecedented scrutiny. And still, they chose each other. In the eyes of the world, they were reckless. To each other, they were deliberate. This was not about betrayal. It was about alignment. Two lives crossing at the exact moment neither could ignore. Brangelina became a symbol not just of romance, but of intensity elevated to ideology. Of love intertwined with mission. Of two powerful individuals daring to believe that together, they could build something larger than themselves. But the same fire that warms can also destroy. And though neither of them knew it yet, this love, the greatest of Angelina's life, would eventually demand the highest price she had ever paid. What Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt built together was not just a relationship. It was a universe. A family shaped across borders, cultures, and histories. A living contradiction to Hollywood's narrow definitions of home. Their children did not share one face, one language, or one origin story. They shared something else instead, intention. When Shiloh was born in Namibia, far from red carpets and studio lights, it was a statement. A quiet refusal to let fame decide the conditions of motherhood. In the stillness of an African sky, Angelina chose distance over spectacle, protection over attention. Brad stood beside her, overwhelmed, steady, changed. Then came Pax. Zahara. Maddox. And later, the twins, Knox and Vivian. Each arrival expanded the family not just in size, but in meaning. Adoption was not charity. It was identity. A declaration that family could be assembled through choice, responsibility, and love rather than blood alone. To the world, they looked extraordinary. To themselves, they were simply trying to hold everything together. Their life became nomadic. One country blending into another. Humanitarian missions woven into family routines. Children falling asleep on planes. Homework done in hotel rooms. Dinners shared in places where war and displacement were not abstract concepts, but lived realities. Angelina wanted her children to see the world as it truly was, broken, beautiful, unequal, and worth fighting for. Brad followed her into that vision, supporting causes, traveling when he could, learning how to be present inside a life that never stood still. From the outside, it looked like harmony. Inside, it was fragile. The weight of responsibility grew heavier with each passing year. And then loss arrived, unannounced and irreversible. Angelina's mother died after a long battle with cancer. The woman who had shaped her, supported her, and understood her silences was suddenly gone. That loss cracked something open. Angelina withdrew, visibly thinner, emotionally quieter. Grief settled into her bones. For months, she moved through life as if underwater, breathing only because her children required it. Brad became her anchor during that time, holding her when words failed, standing between her and collapse. But grief has a way of awakening fear. When genetic tests revealed that Angelina carried the BRCA mutation, the threat became personal and immediate. The risk was not theoretical. It was inherited. It was waiting. And so she made a decision that terrified her, to undergo preventive surgeries, including the removal of her breasts. In sterile hospital rooms filled with cold light, Brad stayed. He held her hand. He listened to her fears. He reassured her when she questioned her own body, her identity, her worth. In those moments, love was no longer romantic. It was practical. Devotional. Exhausting. She survived. But survival changed her. Psychologically, these years marked a turning point. Happiness no longer felt carefree. Every moment of joy carried its shadow. Every laugh existed alongside the quiet knowledge that something could be taken at any time. The larger the family grew, the deeper the fear of loss became. Angelina loved fiercely, but she loved defensively now. Protecting. Anticipating danger. Preparing for impact. Brad, too, felt the pressure of being a partner, a father, a public figure under constant observation. The world praised them endlessly, yet offered no shelter from strain. What they had was real. But it required constant maintenance. These were the years when happiness looked complete from the outside and precarious from within. When love was abundant but never light. When every decision carried consequence. When family became both purpose and pressure. They had built something rare. Something beautiful. And precisely because of that, they were terrified of losing it. In silence, beneath the photographs and headlines, the question lingered, not spoken, but always present. How long can even the greatest love survive under this much weight? When Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt finally married, it was not a beginning. It was a pause. The ceremony took place quietly at Chateau Miraval, a place meant to symbolize refuge and continuity. Their children stood as witnesses. Vows were handwritten. The world was kept outside the gates. It was not a celebration of passion, but an affirmation of endurance, a promise made after surviving years of pressure together. But by then, the cracks had already formed. Their lives no longer moved at the same rhythm. Angelina was turning inward, toward directing, humanitarian work, and the emotional gravity of motherhood. Brad was pulled outward, toward films, business ventures, and a world that demanded constant visibility. Neither path was wrong. But they were no longer parallel. Silence began to fill the spaces where conversation used to live. In an attempt to confront that distance, they chose to work together once more. The result was By the Sea, a film about a marriage decaying in real time. On screen, they portrayed a couple drowning in resentment, disconnection, and quiet cruelty. In interviews, they insisted it was only fiction. It was not. The film was not an act of healing. It was an exposure. A mirror held too close for comfort. Every argument rehearsed for the camera carried echoes of their private life. Every silence felt familiar. They were no longer pretending to be strong. They were documenting their fracture. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere grew heavier. Brad drank more. Angelina withdrew further. Their home became quieter, colder, filled with unspoken tension. They traveled separately. Communicated less. When they did speak, it was often logistical, cautious, stripped of intimacy. Love did not vanish. It hardened. Then came the flight. A private plane traveling from Europe to the United States. The children were on board. What happened inside that enclosed space would never fully leave it. According to court filings, Brad was intoxicated. Voices were raised. Fear entered the cabin. Angelina later alleged physical and verbal aggression toward her and the children. The flight landed. But nothing returned to the ground. Angelina did not confront him publicly. She did not call the media. She made a decision that felt cold, but was rooted in instinct. Protection over explanation. Survival over repair. Within days, she filed for divorce. An investigation followed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation examined the incident. No criminal charges were filed. Legally, the case closed. Emotionally, it never would. From that moment, the transformation was complete. They were no longer partners navigating difficulty. They became opposing sides in a process that would stretch for years. Lawyers replaced conversations. Court documents replaced memories. The home they had built together dissolved into schedules, custody arrangements, and legal language. Psychologically, this was the point of no return. For Angelina, silence became armor. Speaking risked escalation. Remaining quiet offered control. Every word unsaid was a boundary drawn around her children. Around herself. For Brad, the fall was sudden and public. The man once admired as a symbol of stability and charm was now scrutinized, questioned, reduced to allegations and apologies. He entered therapy. He admitted fault in his behavior, though he denied physical violence. Accountability and denial existed side by side. The marriage did not end in a courtroom. It ended in that aircraft cabin. What followed was not closure, but endurance. A long, exhausting confrontation where neither side truly won. Where truth became fragmented, filtered through documents and statements. Where love, once fierce and defining, was replaced by distance and damage control. This was not a dramatic ending. It was a quiet collapse. And in that collapse, Angelina chose something she had learned years before, that sometimes, survival does not look like fighting. Sometimes, it looks like walking away without explaining yourself. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was strategy. Divorce, for Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, did not end with a signature. It multiplied. What followed was not separation, but entanglement stretched across years. A legal war fought quietly, relentlessly, through documents, hearings, and decisions that shaped daily life. Love had already collapsed. Now trust was dismantled piece by piece. The most painful battlefield was not money. It was the children. Custody negotiations unfolded slowly, methodically, draining emotion from every interaction. Therapy sessions replaced family conversations. Lawyers replaced parents at the table. Time was divided, measured, supervised. What once felt natural now required permission. As years passed, distance grew. The children, each old enough to form their own understanding, began to pull away from their father. Some did so silently. Others more visibly. Names were shortened. Connections loosened. Visits became complicated, emotionally loaded, restrained. The family that once traveled the world together now existed in fragments. For Angelina, this was devastating but unsurprising. Her priority had narrowed to one singular purpose: protection. Every decision, every refusal, every silence was filtered through that lens. She did not seek victory. She sought stability. For Brad Pitt, the loss was layered. Not only the marriage, but the identity he had built around fatherhood began to erode publicly. He pursued sobriety, therapy, accountability. Yet repair, especially with children, does not follow timelines imposed by courts. While custody battles continued, another front opened, one rooted in memory rather than emotion. Chateau Miraval. Once, it had been their dream. A place of retreat. Vineyards stretching into the horizon. A home where children ran freely, where vows were exchanged, where a future had been imagined. Miraval was not just property. It was a symbol. And symbols are dangerous when love dies. Ownership became conflict. Percentages replaced promises. What had once been shared now required valuation. Angelina made a decision that shocked the public but made sense privately. She sold her share of Miraval. Not as revenge. As release. She no longer wanted to be tied to a place saturated with trauma. In legal filings, she described Miraval as something that ended emotionally long before it ended on paper. To her, the estate had died the moment the family fractured. Brad saw it differently. To him, the sale was betrayal. A violation of trust. A forced partnership with someone he did not choose. Lawsuits followed. Accusations hardened. What had once been laughter-filled halls became battlegrounds defined by contracts and claims. As the dispute dragged on, the vineyard suffered. Revenue declined. The brand lost its innocence. What was once marketed as romance and craftsmanship became associated with conflict and decay. The cost was not just financial. It was symbolic. Psychologically, this phase revealed something deeper. Memory itself had become a burden. Places once linked to joy now triggered grief. Shared history turned toxic. The past no longer comforted, it accused. For Angelina, letting go of Miraval was an act of survival. A refusal to remain anchored to a version of life that no longer existed. For Brad, fighting for it was an attempt to preserve meaning in the ruins. Neither was wrong. Neither truly won. As the legal war stretched into its 8th year, exhaustion replaced anger. The noise faded, leaving behind something quieter and heavier, acceptance without peace. What remained was this truth. When love collapses, it is not only the future that disappears. It is the past that becomes uninhabitable. Miraval still stands. But it no longer holds a family. It holds echoes. And for Angelina Jolie, every echo was a reminder that healing sometimes requires abandoning even the most beautiful memories, because carrying them costs more than letting them go. For a long time, Angelina Jolie did not speak. Not because she had nothing to say, but because everything inside her was still too raw to shape into language. When she finally allowed herself to look back, she described those years as living inside fog. Moving forward without orientation. Breathing, but never fully present. Each day shaped by legal demands, emotional exhaustion, and the quiet responsibility of holding 6 lives together while her own sense of self slowly dissolved. She admitted something rarely heard from someone so admired. She did not survive those years through strength alone. She survived because of her children. If it were not for them, she said softly, I would not have made it. Not a dramatic statement. A fact. Motherhood became her only compass. When everything else felt unstable, public opinion, identity, marriage, legacy, her children grounded her in something undeniable. They needed safety. Calm. A home free from constant noise. And so she chose withdrawal over performance. Angelina stepped back from Hollywood, from the machine that had once amplified her voice and then devoured her privacy. She did not disappear. She narrowed her focus. Reduced her world to what mattered most. Healing, not visibility. Presence, not applause. Rebuilding did not happen through scandal or reinvention. It happened quietly. She began creating again, but differently. Not as a star seeking validation, but as a woman shaping spaces where meaning could exist without spectacle. On Broadway, she stepped into the role of producer, supporting stories about youth, resilience, and inherited pain. One of those projects was created alongside her daughter, not as a headline, but as a shared act of trust. Then came Atelier Jolie. Not a fashion label in the traditional sense, but a concept. A place for ethical creation. For sustainability. For people whose hands carried stories often erased by luxury. For Angelina, it was not business. It was repair. This phase of her life was not about reclaiming power. It was about redefining it. Her understanding of love changed completely. Love was no longer romantic intensity. It was protection. It was nurturing. It was knowing when to hold on, and when to let go. She no longer spoke of love as something that consumes. She spoke of it as something that allows growth. Something that does not demand sacrifice of self in order to survive. Something quiet enough to feel safe. When the divorce finally ended, she did not describe joy. She described relief. Like stepping out of a locked room after years of shallow breathing. The air felt unfamiliar. Freedom did not arrive as celebration. It arrived as space. There were still scars. Still fatigue. Still questions about identity after so much loss. But for the first time in years, she could hear her own thoughts without interruption. The world still sees Angelina Jolie as a symbol. Of beauty. Of rebellion. Of strength. But that is no longer how she defines herself. She is not interested in being admired. She is interested in being honest. Today, she lives like someone who has left a battlefield behind. Not eager to prove survival. Not demanding recognition for endurance. Simply choosing peace over performance. Truth over narrative. Freedom over illusion. She does not deny her past. She does not romanticize it. She understands now that some loves are meant to transform you, not stay with you. That letting go is not failure. It is sometimes the most responsible form of love. Angelina Jolie is no longer the woman the world bowed to. She is the woman who stood up quietly after everything collapsed. And in that stillness, she found something far rarer than fame. She found herself.